Hi, welcome to Dig In with True Leaf Market. I'm Ashley.
And I'm Jerry.
And we want to say thank you for coming back, Jerry. Today we're talking about cover crops. So to get started and get to know Jerry a little bit before we dig into our subject, we just want to get to know you a little bit and hear about what you're growing in your garden right now and what you're getting ready for the next season.
Well, this time of year we're the spring crops are largely finished, so I've pulled out all of the peas and all of those early spring crops. Most of my summer crops are not really coming on too strongly yet. The tomatoes and cucumbers, they're not there yet. So mostly, to be honest with you, it's weeding and watering and mulching, that kind of thing.
All the fun tasks that every gardener loves.
That's right. I've got beans coming on pretty good. I'm replanting a few second crops of a few things, but we're still a little early to be planting the fall brassicas and things like that. So it's a relatively quiet time in the garden.
Awesome. And I know you were just telling me earlier today about some things that you are hardening off right now. Can you tell us what you're growing there?
Well, yeah, those are not really for the garden for the most part, although I do have some Swiss chard that's going to go in, and I'm also going to be doing some from seed. So here in hot Utah, the only way you can bring up a seed bed effectively is under a mulch. But you can do something like Swiss chard, which is surprisingly heat tolerant. If you've got a mulch, I use straw, and to help keep the moisture in the soil long enough for the seeds to come up. So you could do second plantings of root crops and some certainly faster crops easily right now, but I do recommend covering with a mulch to help bring that seed up.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Yeah, thanks for sharing a little bit about your garden. I feel like it's always fun to hear about all the different things that you have going on. Well, to dig into our subject of cover crops, we just want to start out, can you explain a little bit about what they are and why someone might want to grow them in their home garden?
Well, a cover crop can actually be almost anything, but in concept, we have a few plant families that are primarily used for cover crops. The idea is just to keep something growing on the ground as much as possible. This has benefits for the soil in particular, but also in weed suppression, and then at a later point, there's all kinds of biomass that it can add to the soil fertility, help in structure and fertility. We'll kind of go into that in a little detail.
Yeah, and just before we dive into that detail, I want to clear up a few confusing things that people often bring up about cover crops. Can you explain the difference between a ground cover and a cover crop?
It's an excellent question. We get this one a lot. So remember then, that a cover crop is always a temporary cropping. I mean, what we intend to do, or the best, is it's going to be terminated at a certain point, or die on its own if that's what you're planning, and usually either worked back into the soil or laid down on the soil to decompose. It's during that decomposition process that a lot of the benefits of a cover crop are harvested, are reaped. That's when they add the nutrients and biomass back into the soil that they have collected over time. So, and a ground cover, on the other hand, is a permanent planting. It's intended to be there for weed suppression, sure. If we think of ground covers, the most common ground cover in the country by far is lawn. It's not always the best one, but that's an example of a ground cover. It's a permanent planting. It's going to be there for a long time. Cover crops are a temporary planting. They're there primarily to benefit the soils, and they're often much taller and uglier looking than a cover crop, than a ground cover is.
Thank you. So just as a quick recap about that, ground covers are typically more permanent. They're going to be a little bit more attractive. They're going to offer some benefits, but on the other hand, cover crops are meant to be temporary. They're going to be killed off to add that benefit of the nutrients and the biomass and organic matter back into the soil in preparation for your coming growing season, rather than being something that you're going to interplant. You're going to plant it, kill it, and then you're going to get ready to plant your crops into that same space in the next season. So now diving into the specifics of cover crops, can you tell us a little bit about the benefits of each category?
Well, one of the most common benefit, that they all share, but is strongest sometimes in the hardy grains, and I should clarify, the kinds of crops that are generally used for cover crops are generally either the hardy grains or the grains and cereals, and the legumes, that's the clover or alfalfa family, and then the brassicas. And each has some of their advantage, but they all three add biomass. In particular, the grains tend to grow fast, come up fast, add a lot of biomass, stabilize if you've got issues with erosion, whether wind or water. Then the legumes are also known for setting nitrogen. Remember that legumes in the right condition can take nitrogen out of the air and fertilize themselves, and that benefits because whatever grows there after the legumes will benefit from the nitrogen that the legumes have pulled out of the air and set into the soil. The brassica group is also great for biomass. They also are known to pull up nutrients from deep out of the regular feeding zone of crops that are more shallowly rooted. And some of them have some other benefits, including the mustards are thought to have some anti-nematodal properties. They're all good for weed suppression.
Awesome. I love that. I know biomass can be kind of a new term for some of the newer gardeners. Can you explain what biomass is and why it is beneficial?
Biomass is just a fancy way of saying organic matter, which just basically means dead plant material. It is one of the primary methods that we improve the structure of soil as well as fertility. By adding biomass, we're both increasing the ability of the soil to hold water, to take up and hold water, but also to keep it loose enough so that air will penetrate well. It just generally increases it benefits the structure of the soil, both for any plants and for the whole biome, for the microbacteria that grow in there as well. So the biomass is just a fancy way of saying organic matter. We've heard organic matter, organic matter, organic matter all our life. Biomass is just another fancy term for that.
Organic matter really is the superhero of the garden, because it really, if you have any problem, it's going to help you fix it, whether it's you need to retain more water, or you need better drainage, or you need to hold on to the nutrients. We can't recommend adding organic matter to your soil enough, over and over and over again, because as your plants use it, you want to keep replenishing it.
Absolutely.
So when should cover crops be planted? Because I know there's a few different times that they can go in and be planted, but new gardeners may be, wondering, if I already have something in the garden, can I still plant it? Can you explain a little bit about the timing?
The timing can be as needed for your application, but for most of us in the temperate zones, it's mostly done in the fall and for overwinter and into the spring some. It really can be done anytime depending on when you grow. When the ground is not being used for any other main crop, it benefits the ground to still have some cover on it, to have something growing in it. I was raised in southern Utah, where a lot of that farmland will revert to blow sand after being neglected for too long with nothing growing on it. And so for us, however, when we're talking about cover crops here in the temperate zones, what we're mostly talking about in our gardens, we're mostly talking about fall and winter cover crops, and some into the spring. We do most of our cover crops are hardy cover crops, and we plant them in the fall. But hey, if your winter is colder, or if you do most of your gardening over the winter, as they do in some places in further south than us, you might be considering a cover crop in the summertime or in the spring, because your falls are too busy.
So what kind of cover crops would you suggest for fall planting?
We usually use cover crops that will either go through the winter or at least well into the fall. And these include the hardy grains, most particularly winter rye or winter wheat, and the winter legumes, the hardy legumes, things like vetch and peas, winter peas as opposed to like a garden pea. And then also brassicas, some of which are surprisingly hardy, although most of them don't go through the winter. Clover comes to mind, red clover in particular, and mustard, and any of the radish is very common. It has some other benefits of its own. Turnips, these are cover crops that will take the cool weather of our fall, and produce a lot of biomass and have some other benefits. And or sometimes come back in the spring, but they can be planted again in the spring if necessary.
And so if you're planting in the fall, when would you want to plan on killing or terminating your cover crop to be able to add that biomass and to reap all the benefits of planting a cover crop?
Kind of depends on what you plan to do with the plot next spring or that area next spring. But it is very common for us to go right through the winter and then terminate next spring at least a few weeks, 2 to 3 weeks is usually the recommendation, before you plan to plant whatever it is you're going to do right in that spot. So that means for your early garden where you've got your peas and stuff like that, you might be terminating just as soon as you can in January or February next year. Whereas for the main garden or for the warmer part, the summer garden, you might let that go and not terminate until April or May even. Give it a little bit of time to break down before you go ahead and plant up your summer garden.
And the reason that we really want to allow that 2 to 3 week time frame to allow the plant matter to start decomposing is because during the decomposition process, the nutrients in the soil can actually be tied up. As there's fluctuations and there's a lot of active things happening in the soil, you want to really allow that time frame to allow those actions to kind of settle down so the nutrients can then be available to your developing plants over those next, the young weeks, I guess you could say. As they're developing, they need access to all those nutrients to start growing. Do you have any other comments on ways that someone might terminate their cover crop?
Oh, the processes are fairly straightforward. There's 2 or 3 different ways. On a commercial scale, in big farms and stuff, they use crimping machines and things like that. But the most common way for us in our gardens is to either mow them down, a string trimmer works good, or a hand sickle, or a lawnmower if you're on the flat, or a high deck mower. Mow them down, and we can either leave them laying on the surface as a mulch in a kind of a no-till technique, or in the more traditional technique, we can work them into the soil. You can use a spade or a spading fork, which is what I do, or a tiller. You can till them into the soil, especially here in the dry West. When left on the surface as a mulch, they function as a mulch, and that's a benefit, but they don't decompose very fast. They mostly desiccate. But the methods are typically to chop them or mow them down low. You want to mow them down low, and then either work them into the soil or leave them on the soil to decompose. You may get some regrowth. That's okay. Just terminate that when you're ready.
And to bring up, while mowing them down, cutting them is probably the most common method to terminate, you also can use the benefit of a cold winter to kill them off.
Oh, I should have mentioned that. There are winter kill cover crops, or depending on where you're at, different crops will winter kill at different levels. And that's one way to kill it in the first place, because you lose the benefit perhaps of that growth that we might get in the spring. We get a lot of good spring growth, but on the other hand, you don't have to terminate yourself next spring.
So I just want to mention some of those most common crops that will just naturally winter kill if you have a pretty cold winter. And by cold winter, we're talking, say, 0 to 10 degrees?
Yeah, below zero. We would say most of the winter kill crops winter kill at less than 0 degrees, or actually most of the winter kill crops, they will die off in the 20s, like oats and things like that. They don't survive the 20s. If you're into the 20s, they're going to die.
Mm-hmm. Some other good options are lentils, peas, millet. Do you have any other favorites?
Yeah, those millets and some of those really tender ones, they won't even take a frost. They're dead at first frost.
Mm-hmm. Right, and do you have any favorite mixes? Because I just want to bring up, if you're looking for a lot of benefits and you want to really get the most out of growing a cover crop this fall, you really want to look into, growing a variety of plants that will offer all the benefits that we've brought up. If you want biomass, you want to have good drainage, you want aeration, you want to add some nutrients back into your soil, a mix is really your best option. Can you speak a little bit to some of your favorites?
Yeah, and you've got the right idea. If the concept is everything has its own benefits, using a mix really is the way to go. For a lot of people without a lot of study or a lot of work, and we have our general purpose, our general purpose mix, which is good for either fall or spring planting. That includes everything we've spoken about more or less. It includes grains, it includes legumes, it includes brassicas. That's a favorite. There's another one we also carry, our spring mix, has some of the ones that are a little more tender and a little less of the hardy stuff, but it is hardy enough to be planted very early in the spring and get the benefit of the time when it's still too cold to plant your summer garden. You can grow a lot of biomass then. Some of the other favorite ones, mustard is one of my favorite mixes, only because mustard just grows like nobody's business. And it is thought to have some anti-nematodal properties. Those are at least three good mixes, our all-purpose, our spring mix, or our mustard mix.
Mm-hmm. So our farmer's favorite, you can look out for our spring mix, and again, that all-purpose garden cover crop mix is our top seller.
It's our go-to. It's the one I use mostly.
Mm-hmm. And that does well across different zones too. So it's fit for anyone.
Widely adapted. That's the other benefit of a mix, where some of this may winter kill in the coldest, but survive in some of the warmer. Having a broader base of species gives you a broader applicability. It's more likely, you're more likely to be successful where you are.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, Jerry. We do want to invite you, share in the comments, and we want to hear what you want to learn about. We want to hear your questions about cover crops, and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thank you so much for joining us here at Dig In with True Leaf Market.